Hi there. This is an example of how you might annotate a graphic novel page in preparation for analysis. But remember that while there are some things that are certainly intentional and there are correct features to annotate, you as the reader bring your own experience to the text, so you might find meaning in things that someone else does not. We're going to go through the approaching a text steps for graphic novels, beginning with orientation and then skimming, then scanning, then decoding, and finally global understanding. Okay, so we'll begin with orientation. Now, this is the opening scene of chapter 1, where the Monkey King has been humiliated and rejected from heaven, and he had raised quite a fuss. And so I'm just going to put that at the beginning at the top here. Chapter 1, after rejection from heaven. So that just gives me some context about when this is happening. Now we'll move on to skimming, where we get our first impressions, and you think about what do I notice before I really get into decoding. Well, what I notice is that the Monkey King looks pretty upset. So I could say he looks lonely, and because of without even thinking about the artistic choices here, he's very isolated. Right, that's very obvious. That he's lonely, he's isolated, and he's very upset. Yeah, and so even something I could kind of quickly see is that there's no other text on here except for narration, and so the narration here feels kind of detached, feels kind of impersonal, right? I see that he's in this darkness as well, a lot of darkness, actually. So even the sky, the cave, it's all in darkness. All these shadows. Okay. So now we'll move on to scanning. Now we're looking more carefully for specific features. So I'm going to change my color here. This is going to help you with your organization. If you use different colors, then you'll be able to see what is, which step you're on when you were doing those things. So for scanning, I'm going to use pink. We're going to identify, first of all, the panels. So we've got panel 1, 2, and 3. And you want to make sure that you're identifying gutters. It just shows that you know that information and you understand that structure. So we have the gutters here between the panels, pretty standard. These 3 panels are a very standard comic book or graphic novel structure. And in terms of transition types, we've got one transition here where we're going scene to scene, because we can see he's outside the cave and then he goes inside the cave, right? Pretty simple. And then here we have a moment to moment. Okay, because it's in the same scene now, but he's moving to a different, location. It's just like step by step here, moment by moment. The narration is voiceover only, so I'm going to just acknowledge that here. Voiceover only. And I don't see any splash or bleed here. There's no voice bubbles or anything. So I'm going to move on to style. So that was form. I'm moving on to style. And I'm looking at the foreground, midground, background. And so there is, interestingly, like in this scene, we've got some background. So that's good to identify. And the midground would be this tree here. And then the Monkey King himself is the foreground. So there is some use of distance here. And then we have our other 2 panels, and there is a bit of background there in terms of that waterfall. You could identify that. And the Monkey King is in the foreground. We could also identify that these are all kind of like medium shots. So you could say just down here, all scenes are medium shot of Monkey King. Looking for things like the graphic weight. Now, the graphic weight, clearly, when you have all this, what we call negative space, okay, so we can identify the negative space, and there's negative space in the sky here and also in that other cave, and that the Monkey King himself here is the heavy graphic weight, right? Okay, he's the the only thing in that scene, and in these others also he holds the most graphic weight. Okay, we're looking for things like facial expressions and emanata. Well, we don't see any emanata right here, right? There's no little dashes or veins or anything like that, no teardrops. Except perhaps we could identify that maybe this waterfall could count as emanata. So, just for fun, we could say emanata. But down here, we clearly see facial expression finally. So we see the Monkey King is headed home. He's in shadow and she's drooped over. So it looks very much like he's feeling some deep emotions there. And you could identify that drooping shoulders potentially. And then here is his facial expression. He is very upset. Okay, and we're not even going to get into yet what he's upset about. Okay, but he's very upset, and that's important. And so we're going to move on to the drawing style. So we're going to look at this. We know that this drawing style, again, we can kind of write it down here because we know that it kind of refers to everything. So we could say drawing style is simple. Okay, and we look at all our categories here. Simple or complex, it's simple. Realistic versus iconic, it's iconic, right? Because we see that this is not the mountain there is kind of complex, but the rest of it's very simplistic and very iconic in terms of it's just trying to show us things without giving us too much actual imagery. Is it objective or subjective? I would say when you think about this voiceover narration being very impersonal and we're just kind of seeing the Monkey King from outside, we don't see his internal thoughts really until we get a little taste of it at the end there. But we'd say that this is objective, right? We're seeing it for what it is. We're not seeing somebody's perspective really. And then is it specific or universal? This is pretty specific to the Monkey King. Okay, so we've got that squared away. And color, we can say even down here too, colors are simple. I mean, I think there's only like 6 colors, right? So if you look at, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, about 6 colors in there. The camera angles are all medium shots, which I identified already before. And it's kind of a long shot of the mountain, but it's a medium shot of the Monkey King. So moving on, we can go to decoding. So decoding is now when we're going to say, okay, we've identified a bunch of stuff, right? So now we want to identify what some of these things mean. So we're going to start decoding. So what do the features mean? What is their purpose? Potentially, I'm just going to tease out this emanata here, but I'm going to switch colors again because I want to make sure that I'm clear about what I'm doing. I'm decoding, and then decoding is green in this case. So let's see. I'm going to just talk about this emanata for a sec because I think that's possibly, it might, again, this is your interpretation. So you may totally disagree. You may find things that I don't find. But here, I'm going to say maybe this is something called pathetic fallacy, where, when it rains, when a character is sad. And there's going to be a question mark because I'm not sure about that, but I think it's possible. But in this case, yeah, so maybe that's him feeling sad, right? The drips here. And maybe the author intended that, maybe they didn't at all, and that's fine. I'm making a guess here. Some things we just don't know for sure. So the voiceover here says the Monkey King couldn't stop shaking as he descended on Flower Fruit Mountain. And I think that shaking is very important, right? So shaking tells me that he is very angry, right? He's very angry at the gods. Okay, so that's my first thought there. And then the scene to scene represents him going home. Okay, so I'm just kind of clarifying that note. Foreground, background, midground, it all kind of relates to him going home. So I'm not going to spend too much time on that. Let's see. Now the focus here, we've got, I didn't really identify this earlier, but I think the idea of slumped shoulders, and I should have done this in pink. So I'm going to just quickly go back and keep my system up here. That shadow and not showing face, right? And those are important things. And I'm going to now switch back to my green because that's my annotation, my decoding. And I'm going to say that the shadow represents sadness. And I'm going to say not showing the face, hiding emotion. Okay, so lots of things you could talk about there. And you can always pull so much out of these things. This is just a very simple scene, right? Like this takes a couple of seconds to read. The negative space, again, represents this loneliness. Okay, and so it really kind of ties into all that, right? That this is a lonely existence for the Monkey King. Now, when we saw him previously, he was very, happy and surrounded by all his friends. He was very proud, very excited, and now he's all alone in this black emptiness of his cave. Now, we're going to get to what it says down here in a minute, but that's very important. So we have a throne down here, right? The graphic weight of him sitting on his throne. And we can say that a throne equals success and power, right? These things that he wanted to attain, the things that he did attain, royalty, right? So this is a very important symbolism for him to be sitting on a throne at this moment when he's just been rejected by the other gods. Okay, and he's very upset. And the shadows, yep, showing loneliness and sadness, darkness and shadows. This is again more isolation. I could just probably point up to my other thing here and say this is super important, right? And highlight that. Okay, now just addressing this down here, the idea of that drawing style is simple, iconic, objectives, and specific, and colors are simple. That is the style of this artist, right? But it's interesting that it is cartoony, yet the story is deeper than it seems. And what do I mean by that? Let's get into it. So we have this scene where we know that these panels are medium shots of the Monkey King. So we're getting this objective view of him coming home, totally without saying anything. But let's look at the words. The Monkey King couldn't stop shaking as he descended on Flower Fruit Mountain. So again, my first assumption there is he's very angry at the gods. Then the second panel. When he entered his royal chamber, the thick smell of monkey fur greeted him. Smell of monkey fur. So now we identify, wait a minute, he's angry at the gods, yes, but he notices his own smell, his own like animal smell for the first time. Okay, and that's very important. He had never noticed it before, right there, okay? And so then we go down here and it says he stayed awake for the rest of the night thinking of ways to get rid of it. That is pretty intense, right? Because if we look at this as, again, we look at layers of a story, right? And very literally, it's a monkey who became a god and was rejected, and he came back and he suddenly smells his own, animal scent. And he's bothered by that. And so he thinks he's got to get rid of it. But why? So this is, the Monkey King wants to reject his monkeyness. Okay? But even more important than that, if we see that this is not just a story about the Monkey King, this is a story about the other characters. This is a story about a Chinese American boy. And if we take that and add that to understanding that context to this idea, then suddenly we're leaning into something else. This is leading us to understand that this is about not just a monkey not like wanting to get rid of its monkeyness, but a Chinese boy wanting to remove his Chineseness. Okay, which is not a word. But that is the important takeaway here that we want to really lean into, because this is called something. I'm just going to use a different. I messed this page up, but this is called internalized racism. Okay, and internalized racism, this is a very important thing for us to focus on. Now, you see I've just messed up my notes a little bit, but you get the idea. This is what all of this has kind of led to. So you see this super simple, quick moment, and if you read it very quick, you might not even pick up on it. But this is why we do this deep reading. This is why we approach a text with a process, because we can get something out of it that we didn't see before. And the question is always like, does the reader actually get this message if it's so quick and easy to miss? And that's a debatable question, right? Can we actually say that people who read this it's going to stick in the back of their head and it's going to impact them? They're going to understand a bit about internalized racism? Possibly. But this is also a deeper connection for us, for those who read deeply. We get to understand more about these texts. We get to understand more about life and about somebody's perspective on life. So there you go. There is a full annotation in preparation for analysis of the Monkey King. But wait, there's more! I forgot to talk about irony. And that's okay, because what you're going to find is that as you do this annotation process, it is going to be messy. And you might forget things and you might miss things, and that's fine. The idea is that you always go over it again and just say, wait, is there anything else? Right? And it's okay to go out of order. Go through your process, go through your order, but then you might say, hang on, there's something else here that I've noticed, and you go back and you do it in your other colored pen, maybe, if that's what you're doing, or you just acknowledge that, hey, I didn't point this out before, and now I'll do it now. That's fine. And so, irony. What I realized is that I talked about this thing, cartoony, yet the story is deeper than it seems, right? And that is important. That is called irony. Because you don't expect this cartoony, fun, graphic novel that looks just like a simple comic to actually have such a deep story, right? And here we are at the very beginning of chapter 1, and already we're dealing with something called internalized racism, right? The monkey is rejecting. And again, if you don't get that right away, don't worry about it, because what you're going to find is that this is going to stick with you. Maybe this idea of getting rid of his smell, and you're going to just think about that literally. The monkey is trying to get rid of his smell. And then later, when you see what Jin goes throughout his life and the kinds of things he does, and I'm not going to get into it, no spoilers, but we want to keep this in mind, right? And so the more practice you get with this, the more you're going to see things like this. You're going to say, wait a minute, that's not just about the monkey, that's about internalized racism. And there's a thematic thing happening there. And another bit of irony is the fact that here is this king sitting on his throne feeling lonely. The fact that he's returned to his kingdom, where he should be greeted with celebration and joy as he was before, and he's lonely. And we have even more irony in the fact that he clearly should be angry at the gods. They were prejudiced. They are the ones who rejected him simply because of what he is. And this leads us to the last step, which is global understanding. Why? What is the purpose of this story? What is the purpose of these particular panels? How does it relate to the rest of the story? So then we think about all of the things we looked at, all the features, all the intentional choices that the author made to show us how this monkey has gone from his justified anger at the gods to actually starting to believe that maybe they are right, that maybe they aren't the problem, that he's the problem. And this is that internalized prejudice, right? So he's seeing his monkeyness as a problem now because everybody else does. Now we're getting at a thematic understanding. And then as we go through the rest of the story, we're going to see the stories of Jin and Chinky and the Monkey King and start wondering how they relate. How do they interact? What connections are there between the stories? And we've already got some good ideas here about what to think about, what to look for. And we're going to see how these themes develop and how they become more complex. And now that is the end of the analysis of these panels from the Monkey King.